when you're building or working in a venture builder construct, you really, really go deep on the product, right? And the solution.
Mm-hmm.
And that starts to become, the center of how you talk about the business. And especially in the fundraise, it was very obvious to me that that is not what ultimately gets you the deal at the end of the day. So while in a support context, a lot of investors will focus on the product, when you're fundraising, that's not actually what they want to talk about. And it creates this weird disconnect in fundraising between the reality of the business and what's most important, which is building a product people love, and then how you've got to tell the story to investors.
Welcome, builders, to How Would You Build It? The podcast that dives deep into the dynamic world of startups and product creation right here in South Africa and Africa. This show is more than just interviews. Every week, we sit down with the brilliant minds to provide a masterclass for building digital products amidst the challenges and opportunities unique to our continent. From seasoned founders to dynamic product managers, we uncover the unique stories and strategies behind some of the most innovative digital products being built. So for all the aspiring founders and product builders out there, you'll discover that each episode is a wealth of practical wisdom and local and actionable insights. Make sure to subscribe or follow wherever you listen to our podcasts and connect with us on social media for even more content. Now, let's dive into today's episode.
Welcome, builders, to episode 42, and I'm really excited. Well, sadly, I don't have my co-host Rene with us today. He couldn't make it, but nonetheless, fantastic guest today, Nicole. She's been an advisor for Founders Factory, where I first started following your career. You helped early stage founders in Africa, which I thought was amazing. We're going to definitely dive into those conversations, Nicole. And then you are now the co-founder and COO of Revio, and you helped them raise a 5.2 billion, that would have been nice, a 5.2 million rand seed round earlier this year. And Nicole, thanks for joining. How are you doing?
Yeah, really good. Thanks. It's good to be here.
You've got an amazing story, and it's not difficult to go find and sort of find where your passion is, like the whole Founders Factory, experience, wanting to sort of empower the African continent and the founders and the entrepreneurs. And it's very much needed. So Nicole, if we can just touch on your experience around helping founders around Africa. I mean, not too long ago, there was a lot of conversation around how everyone was looking at Africa as the next China as such, the next India, and there was a lot of opportunity there. Can you resonate with that? Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a couple of questions in that. So the way I first came across the African venture ecosystem was actually while I was still in university. I had always been passionate about entrepreneurship as a vehicle for socioeconomic change, and was very fortunate early on to get into the Alan Gray Orbis Foundation Fellowship, where for the first time in my life, I found a community where I belonged, because I'd always been academic and ambitious and driven, but at the same time, disruptive, rebellious, anti-authority, and didn't fit into a neat box all the way through school. So it was great to finally be in this room full of people who were like me and to realize, oh, okay, I'm an entrepreneur. And that led to some incredible opportunities I got to work on throughout my studies, including a accelerator program coordinated by the Dutch consulate in South Africa, funnily enough. And this was back in 2016 or even earlier, before anyone was really talking about venture capital in Africa or South Africa, certainly in the mainstream. And I got to work with some of the very early entrepreneurs, like the guys at Aerobotics, amazing team, Snaplify, and really saw the potential of what high growth tech-enabled businesses could achieve. And that stuck with me as I started to look for full-time work, but realized I wasn't particularly useful as a graduate who had zero network, zero credibility, few skill sets, to be quite honest. And so I looked for a career that could really accelerate that journey without having to climb a corporate ladder, because I knew I wasn't going to be particularly good at playing that game. And so fast forward, not fun and not great if you don't naturally gel with arbitrary hierarchical authority, right? And I was more interested in building businesses than playing politics, exactly. And so I found an incredible consultancy called Elixir, a lot of their marketing messaging resonated with me. It was about building businesses, not building PowerPoints. So throw out all the junk that usually comes with consulting, throw in some really impactful opportunities to skip the first 10 years of your career and get straight into the boardroom. And I thought, great, this is going to be amazing. And so I flew over to London, interviewed, got the job, super excited, moved over, and spent the first 10 months working on an incredibly challenging project. And I won't say the client name because I don't think I'm allowed to, but basically moving this gigantic organization to the cloud. And before then, never really thought about the cloud or knew what it was, to be quite honest. And I realized I really didn't want to get stuck in deep technology transformation. And I spoke to my partner coach at the firm, and he said, well, unfortunately, Nicole, you're really good at this. So if you don't want to be stuck in this kind of work, you need to come up with something that only you can do. You've got to make yourself so indispensable to this alternative opportunity. And that's actually how I found my way back into working with entrepreneurs and startups in Africa. Because at the time, Elixir was doing incredible work in Silicon Valley and to a certain extent in Europe. And they built the innovation outposts for firms like RBS. And I said, why don't we do the same in Africa? And I had this deep conviction and belief. So to answer your question, direct, like really, really deep conviction around Africa being the next growth frontier, being a source of really fit for purpose innovation, a continent where we could leapfrog, technology that doesn't make sense. And so I pitched this concept of the African Innovation Network. And that's really how I found my way back into the venture ecosystem, which kind of set the stage for everything that's happened after that.
Amazing. I love that. But I completely agree. On a side note, just that, like, find something that is unique, for any kind of person that's trying to get further in their career. Like that's the secret, actually. Just find something that you are uniquely good at and then go and, stand out doing that. I think everyone tries to just be the next this or follow, how can I be? No, find your critical skill that you stand out for. And I think that's quite an important piece of golden nugget there.
I would actually kind of challenge you on that. So I think early in your career, it's really hard to know what you're uniquely skilled at. So I was taking signs from, okay, what do I get frustrated with when, other people don't do them the same way as I would, as sort of cues for my strength. But actually, when I pitched that idea, it was that I was the most curious about it. I was just really, really interested and really, really passionate. And I think if you can follow where your curiosity takes you, you're naturally going to work harder on it. And then if you've got a good enough set of skills and you're willing to work hard enough on those things, you can actually get incredibly far. So if you're one of those super self-aware people early on in your career, you know exactly what you're good at, you've got your USP mapped out, sure, double down on that. I wasn't at that stage. And so I followed my curiosity, and that led me in a pretty good place.
Times two. It's not even a challenge. I just agree with you even more. I think one of my things is driven by curiosity. And as a product manager, you have to be curious constantly, right? Like, why are we building it? Where can we go with this? You just naturally have to walk into every situation curious about it. So I completely agree. And that curiosity will help you find that skill or find that interest or that spark that you didn't realize you had. So yeah, I totally agree. No challenge, just double down. But so Nicole, what's interesting is we've had a few people on our podcast now. I mean, like I said, episode 42, and along the way we asked these founders and stuff, and there's a theme that keeps coming out around Africa and South Africa is that there's just not enough of an ecosystem. There's not enough funding going around. There's not a lot of there's just the culture's not there, and something that we spoke about quite recently is that founders that have got some skin in the game or got some scar tissue, they end up leaving the country or they end up going somewhere else and then buying their trade over there. So just wanted to get your opinion on that. And like, where do you see the gaps in the kind of the ecosystem for founders or potential founders watching this to say, no, but I want to fill that gap. So just want to get your view on that. It's quite a holistic question.
Yeah, it's one I spend quite a lot of time thinking about. And I definitely don't think there's an absence of entrepreneurial potential in South Africa. And I think when you look globally, that's really true. So the question becomes, why do they choose to do it outside of South Africa? And I think there's a couple of things to that. The one is just the institutional landscape is really not set up to encourage people to start businesses and keep their wealth in the country. So if you look at our IP law, it's really outdated. And so already, if you want to raise capital, an investor will insist that you move your headquarters either somewhere like the UK or Amsterdam or Delaware. It's almost impossible to give your employees share options without those being taxed as income. And so you take away one of the most precious incentives that a startup can give to attract the best people. And so that creates all sorts of challenges. It also creates a challenge for you as a founder. The corporate tax rate is high. There's very few incentives for early stage businesses, very few R&D types of grants. If you're doing something that has a little bit more upfront capital expenditure, in the hardware or the biomedical space, as an example. So I think that is a really important factor that drives people to say, stuff this, I've got the ambition, but I'm going to do it somewhere else where there's more favorable conditions. I think the other piece that's played out in South Africa, and I need to be a bit careful here because we're enterprise focused. And so I don't want to say anything that scares off our ideal customers, but particularly some of the financial institutions locally, I think have, on the one hand, created some local innovation, but they've also stifled it quite significantly. So you'll see that there's a fairly oligopolistic structure in the banking sector, as an example. And so if you're looking for some sort of distribution, the banks have very high negotiating power. It's quite concentrated, and that makes those sorts of channels a little bit more difficult to get into, and they can largely be gatekeepers of things like licenses, and there's all sorts of interesting dynamics there. They've also tended to be quite early in their merger and acquisition strategy. And so startups that otherwise might have scaled and created that sort of enabling ecosystem through having a great exit, showing founders the potential, and then channeling that personal wealth back into the ecosystem isn't really happening because they get acquired too early to really have made a value-driven impact, or too early to really have received a significant financial benefit. And I think that's had quite a profound impact in South Africa in particular.
Would you find that in Africa as well? So it's not just a South African thing?
I think it's less so true in other countries in Africa. There's M&A activity, but it tends to happen at a later stage, or it's between startups, right? You see less corporate acquisitions of startups. And I think that's because of the kind of market structure and dynamic of South Africa. It's fairly unique in the depth of corporate institutions that it has, which is a great opportunity on the one hand, especially if you're B2B focused or enterprise focused, and you can crack a distribution partnership at the right time in your journey. But it also has created some interesting dynamics that have not always played out in favor of the startup ecosystem.
So we're having a webinar this week, and it's AI in the African context. So just to finish on the African theme of the conversation, where do you see AI and solving unique problems in Africa? Could you see something? I know Finance Factory are looking into AI projects, but in general, what do you think is going to play a big part in AI in Africa?
Yeah, it's a huge question. I'm very reluctant to comment on AI because I feel like everyone became an expert within 2 weeks on this. So I
100%.
think there's a lot of noise in the market, right? I think it holds great possibilities for more scalable education, which is what I'm most excited about. So things like financial and digital literacy made available on low-cost, more accessible channels, I think would be a really interesting space for AI to play. I think there's use cases in every industry that can help us to deal with some of the infrastructure gaps or distribution of talent. So, for example, satellite medical centers where you could have some sort of AI triaging different cases and referring them to different levels of professional because medical talent is so scarce across Africa. I think we need to be careful around the impact of AI. I think that the jobs it creates will probably lag the jobs it takes away. And it needs to shift the kind of skill sets we're equipping people with across the continent. So the best framing I've personally heard for what AI is good at and what AI is not good at is, if you've ever read Nudge, system 1 and 2 thinking. So something that is, quick thought, doesn't require much reasoning, to then something more complex. AI is much better at system 1 thinking than it is at system 2 thinking. And so I think that's encouraging, in that there'll always be a place for humans who can empathize, that can reason and justify and leverage the insights that AI can produce. But that's certainly not the kind of thinking or jobs that our current schooling system is setting us up for, right? So that is, in my mind, a fairly existential risk that we need to be talking about a bit more.
Sure. Valid points. Although that's why I do like your first statement around the education part of it. It's definitely got the opportunity to fast forward learning, right? I mean, it's not about giving me all the information, but helping me get there quicker, a hell of a lot quicker than I did before. And it's just through a prompt. If you understand the prompt, for example, then you can get that. And I think something that we're not talking enough about is the ease of translations that we can use in AI. Because for me in Africa, if you think about, learning something Xhosa or Zulu, I mean, it's very tough. They're always on the back foot. But all of a sudden, you've got an AI tool that can easily translate things for you. I think, wow, what an opportunity there. So for anyone listening there, please give me a call. But let's move on, Nicole. I'd love to chat about Revio now. Now, obviously, you've moved over there. You're the co-founder and the COO, and you're able to do this fund in this year. So congratulations, first and foremost. But yeah, do you want to tell us the problem that you're solving at Revio, and then we can dive into, the fundraising that you did?
Sure. So Revio was founded in 2020 based on this insight from my co-founder and our CEO, Rowan Buerter, who'd spent his whole career working in payments. And he was working at the time building out a payment processor, and he was just seeing how difficult it was for large enterprise businesses to collect revenue at scale. And that was for a couple of reasons. One was they really struggled to incorporate alternative payment methods into their business. They didn't know how the reconciliation worked. They struggled to prioritize the business case. And that was leading them to leave money on the table, because the way they were trying to collect payments from customers didn't match how customers were willing and able to pay. The second was that payments fail in Africa more than 30% of the time. And that's both on recurring revenue businesses like your digital subscriptions, your insurance, your lending, property, asset financing, list goes on and on. But what we've learned more recently is it's also a big problem for retailers, online businesses. So your online ticketing businesses, your retailers, your on-demand delivery apps, right? And the reasons for failures vary substantially. We've now mapped more than 1,000 different error codes from different processors and gateways that are not always easily to decipher, but categorize them into a whole set of different reasons that those payments can fail. And so the idea behind Revio, and it's evolved over time, but was really to build a business that could help merchants never miss a payment. So never miss a payment because you don't have the payment methods available that your customers use, no matter the country you're operating in. Never miss a payment because there's a technical payment failure or a connectivity timeout or acquirer downtime. And so you're not able to process the payment and that customer bounces off your website. Never miss a payment because there was a recurring failure, card on files expired, and you've now churned a customer that otherwise would have stayed loyal. And never miss a payment. Yeah, right. And never miss a payment because your finance team couldn't pick up who this payment was coming from because you've put your invoice details or bank account details on your invoices and you really can't reconcile them, right? And so that's where we've really specialized. We're this middleware layer that's really looking to reduce the complexity, the cost, and the risk of collecting payments in Africa, both for merchants that are based here, but more recently, merchants that are based elsewhere and are coming to Africa as part of their growth strategy.
Okay, super interesting. Yeah, I mean, I can imagine. I think at the end of the day, what you're helping companies with is their liquidity, because you're making sure that those funds are always coming in. So therefore, I mean, because that's generally where companies fail. You know, they've got, especially for startups. I don't know if that's your ideal customer and who you focus on, but I mean, cash flow management is vital for businesses to stay afloat. And if you're helping them, you know, keep their payments, keep that positive cash flow, that's pretty amazing. Who are your ideal customers, if I may ask?
Yeah, so we've had a bit of a journey on this question.
Okay.
So over the last year, we've been focusing exclusively on enterprise clients. We realized for where we were right at the beginning and how the product had been set up, which was still largely back-end heavy, limited user interface, we were not yet at a point where we could fully automate customer onboarding and activation. And so the unit economics of SMBs didn't make sense for us.
Okay.
We've really built out robust capability over the last year and have been lucky to land some of the largest brands in Africa. So Old Mutual, MTN, Telesure, Innovation Group, really incredible clients, and have learned a lot about what is really the root cause of payment failure. Where do these merchants really suffer, and where is there a disconnect between consumer expectations and willingness and ability to pay versus, as you say, the merchant's need for cash flow management and for customer lifetime value ultimately. What we're really excited about is, while enterprise will remain the focus for at least the next 6 to 12 months, we are releasing a new version of our platform that has the ability for merchants to self-onboard and self-set up. And so particularly for your SMBs that are starting to see decent levels of transaction volume, they can't keep up with manually chasing customers or following up on failed payments. And where it starts to become a much bigger pain point for their business, they're seeing the need to incorporate a second gateway. They'll be able to use all of Revio's capabilities as well, which is, you know, really exciting for us to be able to support some of those fast-growing scale-ups who don't want to be building a payments business while they're building their own business as well.
No, 100%. I mean, in the startups that I've worked in, we had dedicated people that were following up on customers to pay their bills or to pay their accounts. I mean, you have a dedicated team to do that. So, I mean, it's like a no-brainer that this is a great use case. And that's why I keep thinking SMB, because they probably need this more than enterprise. But I mean, I guess you can learn the lessons from enterprise, and then that just helps the SMB get there. So very, very cool. I want to get into the fundraising, but I'm also curious, Nicole, what does a day in the life of a COO look like? Like, what is it that, you get up every day to do as the COO, and what advice could you give to another up and coming COO?
Yeah, it's interesting. So despite my title, I'm much more focused on the commercial side of the business. So I think that's one interesting point is we've really, as co-founders, leaned into our strengths. We realized fairly early on, Rowan's is on the product and technical side. He is the product brains, and I'm sure you could have a much better conversation with him around how we build product, how do we make those trade-offs, how do we make sure we are achieving the development velocity we need to meet all the grand promises I go make on the commercial side. My strength is more so commercial growth, and then some of the strategic ops. So my day will include things like sales calls, especially with our larger clients, checking in with existing ones to see if we're meeting their needs, understanding their feedback and channeling that back to the product team. I lead fundraising for the business based on my previous roles. I was really well positioned to do that. I also head up our brand and marketing, which is starting to get a little bit more attention now that we've raised some decent money and can put a little bit more focus on it. And then also looking at our expansion and coverage strategy. So how do we make sure we are where our clients need us to be? And how do we make sure we always know about the most relevant payment methods for those markets? So very varied, to be honest. And it's been one of the most challenging pieces for me coming into this role is just the constant context switching between fairly high level strategic questions, prioritization, and then someone will ask, how are we going to manage leave? And those questions and that context switching can happen in a matter of minutes, not even hours. And so getting really good at managing not only my time, but my energy has been the skill I've really had to develop in this role. And so being very aware of what gives me energy, what drains my energy, and making sure I've got a good mix of those things every day. Otherwise, I just feel completely exhausted and burnt out by the time it gets to the end of the day.
Oh gosh, yeah, absolutely. So I can imagine the transition from working in a founder's factory environment where you're helping a lot of startups with the startup principles, because a lot of them are the same, right? So, it's just about kind of rehashing, this is where your gaps are, to where now you are digging in the deep weeds every day of solving new problems or mature problems. I don't know how to say it, but I'm sure that's quite an interesting journey that you're going on, because you're not now context shifting from business to business, but rather scenarios within the company that you have to solve for.
Yeah, absolutely. The analogy I've used quite a lot recently is like you're trying to fireproof a house that's burning and add a second story at the same time. Finding the right balance of those things is really, really tough. Whereas an investor, you don't really see the firefighting at all. You don't care that much about fireproofing. You're really focused on, growth and how that's going to play out next. So that's been really, really humbling, and really understanding the constraints, especially when you don't have all the resources available, you're focusing on many things all at the same time. You can't always control when and how things go wrong and when and how things go right. So we've had instances where, you have a quiet month and then next month, 8 clients sign out of nowhere. And that's equally as challenging, even though it's a good problem to have. So certainly very, very different from before. And a lot of my views that I previously held have changed stepping into this role.
Okay. Can you share an example?
I think there's a few. I think when you're building or working in a venture builder construct, you really, really go deep on the product, right? And the solution. And that starts to become, the center of how you talk about the business. And especially in the fundraise, it was very obvious to me that is not what ultimately gets you the deal at the end of the day. And so while in a support context, a lot of investors will focus on the product, when you're fundraising, that's not actually what they want to talk about. And it creates this weird disconnect in fundraising between the reality of the business and what's most important, which is building a product people love, and then how you've got to tell the story to investors. And I think building conviction is a lot more around how do you help de-risk the business for those investors, and how do you create enough momentum in the fundraising process that it feels like to them they're going to be missing out if they don't come in. And so especially looking back and looking at, okay, this is, how I would put together a fundraising deck. This is how I would run a pipeline for all those different engagements. Now, I think in some ways I'm a little bit more cynical, but also there's a game to be played, right? So it's around how do you build that conviction and understand what VCs are really looking for and manage towards that.
Yeah, there's been such an interesting shift from being on one side of the table to the other, but I'm sure it helped you a hell of a lot in that thing. I mean, 5.2 this year. I mean, what was your biggest takeaway in securing that for Revio this year?
Yeah, honestly, it still hasn't quite sunk in. I remember being up really late on a Friday night with Ruan when the money came through, the first ticket, and kind of he phoned me to be like, so this happened. I was like, it did happen, didn't it? You know, because I think we both didn't believe that it had until the money hit the bank account.
I can't fathom what that must be like, you know. So for me, I'm in the product, you know, you're like, tell me what you guys need. Let's, you know, do the user side of it. Let's build and stuff. I can't imagine what it's like seeing that, you know, ching, ching. Oh, look at that nice little figure that just came through, you know.
Yeah, yeah. It was, I mean, it felt existential, to be honest, because it was really like these incredible partners believe in our mission and our team. And that's really exciting. And we now have the runway to be able to execute against the plan we have. I was filled with like overwhelming relief because, you know, we were starting to get to a point where we were going to not be able to pay salaries pretty soon, and you know that was weighing on me pretty heavily. But also we'd built so much great momentum to have, you know, to have not been able to continue on that would have been incredibly frustrating and I think a loss for the market, right? So there was a combination of relief, excitement, and a bit of anxiety because now we need to put it to good use, right? So that's challenging in and of itself.
No, that's the new challenge.
Exactly.
But I thought, I was at the SpecNo event, and you mentioned as one of your answers that you know, for advice for other you know, founders, ask for advice and you'll get funding. Ask for funding and you'll get advice, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think one of the things we did well that meant that we were able to close this round is we started building the relationships and having the conversations far before we needed money. And so what that meant was we'd taken these people on a journey where they'd gotten to see the progress month on month. They knew the team really well. They'd been able to see a lot more than just a point in time set of numbers. And that was really helpful when we said to them, look, we're in a position where we're going to start thinking about bringing in some money. And they were like, great, it's a deal we'd be interested in. Send us the materials when you're ready. And I think that's a much better way to go about fundraising. And I think people think you'll go through defined periods of time when you're fundraising as a startup. You're always fundraising. It just depends on the intensity to which you're fundraising. And so even in these quiet times now, you know, maintaining those relationships is super important. So that was, you know, we started engaging with QED and Partech already October last year. I think it was in the last Cape Town FinTech silly season. And we weren't in a position when we were raising, but it was great to have that initial connection. And we just kept in touch every single month on how things were going.
Amazing. So it's quite a lead cycle there to get that funding. So but now that you've got it, what do you guys focus? How do you prioritize what's next, and you know, to deliver those promises to the customers? What are your plans to, you know, go forward with the funding?
Yeah, a lot of the funding's being used to really deepen our product capability. We've had incredible feedback from our first 10 or so enterprise clients that have helped us to understand really where the pain points are. We've solved a piece of that problem. And so a lot of the work we're doing over the next couple of months is expanding our capability to help solve for more of the pain points they face when it comes to their payment operations. And I can't talk about the details just yet, so we might have to have another conversation in the new year. Of course, building the team. So up until now, I've been the only salesperson. We've run a sales-led, you know, founder-led sales process. We're really growing up now to make that more of a repeatable process, investing in things like content marketing, thought leadership, the right people to really help us take that forward, and who are probably better at sales than I am, to be honest. And that's something that I'm really excited about. And then, we continue to, of course, invest in payment integrations. So making sure we have the full set of options available through our API. New things as they come available, like PayShop. We've done more and more of the mobile wallets across Africa. There's
Amazing.
a couple of
that makes so much sense. Yeah, go mobile, because a lot of people are on mobile, so get those APIs integrated into mobile. That makes so much sense.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's one of the big components that especially global merchants are facing when they come to Africa is it's not a card first market. You've got South Africa, which is a bit of an outlier, but if you aren't collecting on mobile money in certain African markets, you're missing 97, 98% of the consumer base. So I think it's been a clear learning coming for us from those global merchants, but also then helping them to understand how best to use those APMs. And I think the single API is an important part of the strategy, because if I'm Netflix, as an example, I only have one development team, even if I have regional payments teams or leadership teams. And so to justify time on the roadmap, right? For new markets, an expansion market where you don't yet know the potential versus doing some work to optimize your US operations, Africa's always going to lose out. But if you can make it so seamless that, to them, it feels like one integration for the continent, then I think you've got a chance of actually being able to localize that payment stack at scale.
Yeah, amazing. So is Ruan the one that's doing all the technical partnerships? So, getting the pay shops on a call and saying, hey guys, let's integrate our APIs. Is he the one driving that?
Yeah, we've recently shifted that. So that used to sit in my world, and we've realized it's much more of a product partnership type of role. And he's way better placed to do that than I am, because he deeply understands those kinds of capabilities. And I think that's something that's been really important to how we've grown, is there's a lot of openness on the leadership team around roles, strengths, what's working, what's not working, where do we need to reshuffle things. Typically a CEO would lead fundraising, but there's been no ego among us to say, no, Nicole, you're better placed for that, or to say, oh, I was hired because I'd worked in Africa and so I should do expansion. No, Ruan's better suited, so let's put it in his world, right? So as long as you're clear on accountabilities, I think having the openness and the low ego to be able to move these things around as it makes sense is really important.
Yeah. That's a theme that's been on this podcast many a time, is when we have founders, there's two founders on the call, and that is something they bring up often as a key to success, is having that relationship and that transparency between the co-founders, and having that no ego, we're in this together, let's figure out who's the best suited for each role. And I think that's so important, because so many people get their founding team wrong in the beginning, and they don't get to actually get that traction going. So that's really cool. I think we're running out of time. So I think to finish up, I think I could chat to you longer, but I know you're busy, but to finish off, I've got some quickfire questions. So you can't think about it. You have to answer it off the top of your head. You got to give us an answer. There's 5 of them. Are you ready?
Yes. Okay.
Okay. First of all, leadership advice you received that is helping you as a CEO. So advice you were given in your career that you would give to somebody else.
From Amandine at Paystack, she told me that leadership is about learning to disappoint people at a rate they can accept. And that has been hugely valuable to me, because I am never want to disappoint anyone, want to always overachieve against expectations. And so that was really helpful to just reframe my day to day. So that's hugely impactful.
Brilliant. I love that. What is your favorite interview question that you like to ask, or that you've been asked before?
I think it's probably something like, why are you doing this? I think that's, for me, what I'm most curious about, especially when I talk to founders, is, not the what or the how they do it, but it's really, why, what makes them do this, despite it being so difficult, especially if they've done it before. I'm like, why are you crazy enough that you're doing this again? So without more time to think about it, that's probably up there.
Yeah, you're not allowed to think about it. No, but that's great. I love it. You know, the why. It's, again, as a product manager, always think of the why. If you were not doing Revio, what would you be doing?
I've always wanted to build a business in the health space. I think that there's not enough people with, business acumen really looking at that value chain. So either something around like localizing, spare part manufacturing, or something fancy and tech-based. I've always wanted to run like a grand experiment where you take venture principles and you apply them in a really traditional business and see if that would change culture or outcome at all. So at some point in my life, I'm going to get around to that.
So much harder. So hard, but I agree. If we could do that, it would be amazing, right? A highly recommended book that you've read that somebody should read.
Nonfiction, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And then fiction, All the Light You Cannot See. It's my favorite novel.
Okay, cool. And then the last question, I'll put you out of your misery. If you could interview a leader, past or present, who would it be?
Oh, cliche, but I'm just so curious about Elon Musk.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he is my dream dinner party guest because I think he's a combination of crazy and brilliant. I think those things tiptoe a little bit, but I would just love to understand more of what goes on in his head every day.
Yeah, no, incredible. I wouldn't know what to ask him. It's crazy how many people are actually on the fence with him, but I think what he's been able to do and what he is doing and just the way he thinks about things is incredible. So I like that one a lot. Don't feel too cliche about it.
I don't fully endorse everything he does. I just want to put that out there. But I said follow your curiosity earlier, right? Like I'm just super, super curious. So it just makes it
like how his mind works. Like
how
Okay, Nicole, thank you very much. I know you're busy, so thank you very much for joining. It was an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to watching what happens with Revio going forward under your stewardship.
Thank you so much. It's been great to chat to you.